Immersed robot.
So in this video, I just want to give a few of my own thoughts on the comparison between the Pimax CRYSTAL and the Reverb G2. Now, I used to own a Reverb G2, but I don't actually own it anymore, unfortunately, so I can't do a direct A to B comparison between the two headsets, although that would be really handy for me to do at the moment. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here is going to be based off of memory, but I did make quite a few videos on the Reverb G2 on my channel as well, so you can go back and check some of those out for some more in-depth opinions on the Reverb G2 as a whole. But first of all, I want to say that I felt like the Reverb G2 was a really fantastic VR headset, and very much like the Pimax CRYSTAL, I feel like it was best suited to seated VR games, things like sim-based titles, as I mentioned 1,000 times on this channel. And again, I feel like the Pimax CRYSTAL is very similar. So from that point of view, they are two very similar headsets in a certain way, and probably aimed to the more sim-based type of gamers, I would say. And that's not exclusive. I don't mean that exclusively, and both of these headsets can be used perfectly fine in a wide variety of VR. It's just that is what jumped out at me for both of these headsets. Now, in my opinion, the Reverb G2 fell down on two main points, honestly. The first one was with the edge-to-edge clarity of the lenses and the sweet spot. So you could get the sweet spot relatively easy, but even when you were in there and everything was pin sharp in the center of the view, if you just move your eyes around the display, not move your head, just move your eyes, you would see quite a bit of degradation and blurring towards the edges of the lenses. Now, it was probably the worst I've ever seen in any VR headset, that kind of thing. So that was quite a bit of a disappointment to me with the Reverb G2. The other aspect was the field of view with the Reverb G2 as well, which was very small, and in my opinion it was smaller than the Quest 2. And these are both points actually which, once you've had the headset for long enough, you can get used to both of these items, and I found that I did. But these are just two things that really stood out to me, and these are things that I see people mention with the Reverb G2 time and again. Now, on these 2 points where the Reverb G2 fell down, the Pimax CRYSTAL actually excels on both of these. So the edge-to-edge clarity on the lenses is absolutely fantastic with these. There is a very small amount of degradation as you get to the very limits of the lenses, I've found, but it's not enough to really worry about at all with this. And for most of the display, most of the lenses, it is really, really sharp, and you won't have any issues of keeping your head still and looking around the display when you're using this headset. The other aspect is field of view. Now, the Pimax CRYSTAL, from my point of view, has a much bigger field of view than the Reverb G2, which, as I mentioned, was even smaller than the Quest 2. Now, I hesitate getting into field of view too deeply because, in my opinion, it is absolutely subjective. The only way it wouldn't be subjective is if we were all literally getting our eyeballs up to the point where they are touching the lenses in any VR headset, because at that point you can get the maximum field of view possible in any VR headset. In fact, you'll probably be seeing the edges of the displays once you get to that point. And the reason I say it's subjective is because of our variations in face shape, relative eye positions to our foreheads and our cheeks. If our eyes are more deeply set within our heads, then you'll find that you'll have lower field of view. And this is why it's very contentious. People get very angry about this stuff. If one person's perception of field of view in two different headsets doesn't match perfectly with somebody else's, then they can get frustrated with this. I've seen this time and again on various forums, and I think just getting that understanding that it is subjective, not only based on face shape and eye position, but also on the individual face gaskets on two different VR headsets. These can vary wildly, and they can be suited to one person and not suited to another. So field of view is just so very subjective in my opinion, and you only need to look at the tests that people do. You can actually get software tests, and you can get wild differences in perceived field of view in the same headset between two different people. So this speaks for itself, really. Now, all I can go on is my experience of using different VR headsets. I would say that the Pimax CRYSTAL is roughly, and I say roughly, approximately the same as the Valve Index in my opinion. Now, if somebody was to say, no, it's slightly smaller, then I could probably be persuaded that, yeah, maybe it is slightly smaller than the Valve Index. But for the most part, I think that's a good guide for me at least. In comparison to the Reverb G2, the Pimax CRYSTAL is absolutely has a bigger field of view than the Reverb G2. So from that point of view, I think most people would agree with that based on just how different it is. So I think it's safe to say from that point of view. But where did the Reverb G2 excel? And in my opinion, partly it was in form factor, weight, and to a lesser extent in comparison to the Pimax CRYSTAL, audio as well. So I've made the comment several times now, the Pimax CRYSTAL is a heavy headset. It's heavy, it's bulky. Comfort is a different issue. So I can wear this headset quite happily, and I have done for 2 hours, just over 2 hours in VR in one play session. And I don't usually spend longer than that in a VR play session anyway, but there are people that do. So I'm willing to say that, you know, maybe after a few hours, the weight and the bulkiness of this headset might get to some people. For me, it's not a problem at all. But it's important to recognize the fact that this is a big headset, and I would much rather it was a small, you know, it had a small form factor and was lighter as well. I think that would make a difference to my experience in VR. And in my opinion, that is really where the Reverb G2 did excel. It was relatively lightweight and also had a relatively small form factor based on the fact that it was a standard Fresnel LCD based headset. You can only get those headsets really so small, and that was relatively good. It was a good form factor, very comfortable, and you know, relatively lightweight as well. So in terms of overall comfort, I don't have a problem with the Pimax CRYSTAL, but I think it's important to recognise that I think I would have a lesser problem on the Reverb G2. And the other point that I was making there is on the audio. So HP actually licensed the audio solution from the Valve Index for the Reverb G2, and in my opinion that is the best audio that I've ever experienced in a VR headset. Now the Pimax CRYSTAL has the DMAS audio solution, which is very similar actually, and I can't say that it's drastically different in terms of overall audio fidelity from what I remember from the Reverb G2 or from the Valve Index. But my gut is telling me that I think that the Index and the Reverb G2 just had a slight edge on the audio, but there's really not enough in it to get too concerned about. But we should probably finish off on one of the most important aspects of any VR headset really, and that is overall visual quality. Now, the Reverb G2, at the time when it first came out, was one of the highest resolution VR headsets at 2160 by 2160 per eye. And that is really why it attracted people that enjoyed things like Microsoft Flight Simulator, for example, because there's a level of clarity that you want in sim-based titles, which the Reverb G2 was very good at delivering on. And it really did a great job of doing that. I remember the first time I went into the Reverb G2, and it really did blow me away, that clarity in that central part of the lens. Unfortunately, you did have that degradation, that quick degradation of edge-to-edge clarity within the Reverb G2. But once you'd got used to that, and once you'd used the headset for a while, that level of clarity within the Reverb G2 was fantastic. But this is really where the Pimax CRYSTAL excels beyond anything else that I've used. The visual quality in this headset really is next level beyond the Reverb G2. This really does offer some of the clearest, sharpest visuals I've seen, and also paired with that display which is capable of local dimming as well. So you get these really dark, deep blacks and then these much more vibrant colours within this headset as well. And the Reverb G2 on overall clarity and on the brightness and just the vibrancy of the colours really can't compete with the Pimax CRYSTAL. But of course, I shouldn't have said let's finish off on visuals, because we need to get to an important qualifier there, and that is the price of these two headsets. So the Pimax CRYSTAL is available for $1,600, and the Reverb G2, when it was available, because it is discontinued now, it was around $600, although it did have quite sharp discounts towards the end as well. So there is a disparity on price there really between these two headsets, but I think it's clear to see that the Pimax CRYSTAL does offer the next level of clarity and overall experience, I think, when compared to the Reverb G2. So whether you think that's reflected in the price or not, I can't really say. It's a tough call, honestly. But what I can say is that from a Reverb G2, the upgrade path to a Pimax CRYSTAL, although the price is a big jump, that is really the next logical step. There are other VR headsets out there, and there will always be others on the way as well. Now, I've not tried the Big Screen Beyond and that kind of headset, so I can't say how it compares to that headset at this moment in time. But for me, I think the Pimax CRYSTAL does offer a fantastic VR experience for sim gaming and seated based gaming, while also having that capability, very much like the Reverb G2, of being able to be used with a wide variety of other VR games and experiences as well. So it's a tough call, really. I think it really comes down to how much value you place on getting the highest quality visuals within any VR headset. I think that's where it comes down to, because there's not really a comparison that I can make where the Pimax CRYSTAL comes out second to any current VR headset that I've personally tried. And I've tried quite a lot of them, except for, of course, the Big Screen Beyond. I would love to do like an A to B comparison between the Pimax CRYSTAL and the Big Screen Beyond, of course. But for now, I think, the Pimax CRYSTAL is offering the best visual quality that I've seen in VR anyway. So that's it. I think the Reverb G2 still remains a fantastic VR headset and a great budget option, honestly. So there's nothing wrong with it at all. But I think if, without taking price aside, you can't really make the comparison that it beats the Pimax CRYSTAL in certain aspects at least. So I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think in comments anyway. But thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.